Yes, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining in today for this talk about why is the suffering in the world. And it's a big question, and I think we are confronted by this in the last year. By Corona, and also before Corona, we had many options. We could see some suffering in the world. A lot of people have questions about it. And maybe you suffer because you know next week should be Carnival, but Carnival is not happening this year. So you have the feeling like, oh, my world is coming to an end. But other people suffer because they have been on Eindhoven Central Station last week and they were hurt by the riots. Or maybe you experienced the loneliness during Corona. You're sitting at home, don't have many people around you. You suffer because you don't have many people to talk to. Or maybe you suffer because you had Corona. Or maybe you suffer because you've seen people nearby dying because of Corona. Or maybe some other things. I think there are a lot of different aspects and a lot of different ways and levels we can experience suffering. So why there is suffering in the world is a big question. And I don't have the illusion that I can completely answer the question today. But maybe you can have some thoughts about it. And first, let me explain a little bit about suffering in my life. When I was in primary school, I think it was around 9 or 10, I've been bullied for a few years. And when I was bullied, slowly my self-esteem was demolished. Nothing was left of what I was believing of myself, the way I was looking at myself. I was confronted by there was nothing left inside me anymore. There were some moments I was thinking about suicide. I don't want to live anymore. In a world like this, where something like that can happen, where just small children are just hurting you that much, that can give you the feeling like, I don't want to live anymore. Why is the suffering in this world? And it's also a question I often heard from also people around me. I'm a Christian. A lot of people think it's stupid to be believing in God while there's suffering in the world. Last week I was sitting with my neighbors and they said also to me, how can you believe in God when there's suffering? That's impossible. If there's suffering, then it cannot be a God, because God will deal with it. He will finish it, He will make it better. So that's the question we talk about today. And in the beginning maybe you heard the song Praise and Sea from Robin Schulz. It's written by Nidhi Hadida. And Nidhi Hadida is an atheistic Jew, and she's writing this song, and she's singing Yah, and with Yah she means Yahweh, the Hebrew name of God. And she's saying, Yahweh, you never said a word, you didn't send me no letter, but think I could forgive you. See, our world is slowly dying. I'm not wasting no more time, don't think I could believe you. And see, the children are starving, and their houses were destroyed. Don't think they could forgive you. So she's saying, God, if you dare, and you don't do anything about it, I don't want to believe in you, and I cannot forgive you for letting this happen. In a God like that, you cannot believe. In a God like that, you cannot trust. And you don't want to forgive a God like that. A less famous band, Touche Amore, had made an album a few years ago. And this album is all around, is built around the death of the mother of the lead singer, Jeremy Bohm. And Jeremy Bohm is not believing in God, but his mother was believing in a God. And in the whole album you see him struggling with this. And in one of the first songs of the album, he's singing, you died at 69 with a body full of cancer. I asked your God, how could you? But never heard an answer. No one saw it coming. The diagnosis of stage 4. The bravest woman I know, that survived it once before. I never felt so selfish, it's not what I prefer. I always kept it honest, especially for her. She gave me her best, she swore I was her life. I couldn't worship the God that let her fall apart. I couldn't worship the God that let her fall apart. If something like that happens in your life, of course you're angry. And of course, you have difficulties with believing in God. If there's a God, He cannot something like that happen. So first I want to take a close look with you about what is the problem we're talking about. The problem of suffering. And the philosophical way of thinking about this is the following. We're saying God is lovingly and more powerful than anything, but I experienced evil. And because we experience the third sentence, we have difficulties with the first two. There should be something wrong with it. There are some ways we can deal with this. For example, we can say, okay, maybe God is lovingly, but not more powerful than anything. So I experienced evil. So God created the world maybe, but this became bigger than he can handle. In the end, he's also some kind of victim in this game. He cannot deal with it. He cannot heal the suffering in this world. So that can be a struggle. So this can be a way of dealing with it. But I think it's also hard to think about what can a God like this offer to you when you're dealing with suffering. The second way is by weakening the first one. God is not completely lovingly and more powerful than anything. So I experienced evil. So we can say maybe God's not completely lovely. Maybe he's even the origin of evil, or maybe he's just letting it happen because he likes it, or maybe he doesn't care. This is also the way of thinking we see in the songs of Jeremy and Lily. They're also singing about this, and God is not completely lovely. If he's lovely, he should do something about it. If he's not capable of handling something with it, then you cannot count on him. So I think this is also a way we can look at it. But I think if you're dealing with suffering, it makes it much more difficult. Because hope is something a lot of victims need to get further, to know there's an end. It's good to have hope that on some moment Corona will be over. We will have a normal life again. But until the time, we just need to grab the hope. But if we have a God like this, then there's not much hope, isn't it? A third way we could look at this is saying, okay, let's skip God. Let's say there is no God. I experienced evil. We don't have a philosophical problem anymore. It's finished. There's no God. We don't have to bring them together with evil. We just experienced evil. The famous thinker and atheist Richard Dawkins said the following once in a book. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replications, some people are going to get lucky and some people are going to get hurt, and we won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the proportions we should expect. If there's at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no goods. So he's saying a lot of things in this small quote. But he's saying, from an atheistic perspective, why there's suffering, there's no reason, it's just happening. Some people get hurt, some people are going to get lucky. That's the way it is. There's no answer. This is the thing we have to deal with. But the other thing he's saying, that there's no purpose, there's no design, and there's no evil and no good. And I just said, okay, we can say maybe I experienced evil, but according to Dawkins, we have to say I experienced something less pleasant. Because it's really hard to define what's evil and what is good if there is no God, if there's no basic for it. And tomorrow there will be a talk about this during lunch talk, so I really would recommend also to join in to talk further about this. But I think it's also an important thing to talk about. What does it say? How do we define evil? How do we define good? And if we suffer, can we say it's evil, or is it just something less pleasant? So from a second point, I want to take a closer look also about how can we maybe bring those things together. For example, the mother of Jeremy, she was believing in a God. Well, Jeremy was really struggling with it. His mother was continuing her belief in God. She was really going for it. Even when her body was slowly declining and in the end was just starving, she continued with believing in that loving God. So for her it was possible to bring them together, loving God and the suffering in the world. And if you take a closer look on the Bible, I don't know if you ever read it, you will see that God is never described as a God who's some kind of big puppet master, saying, okay, you have to do this, you have to do that, and I'm just pushing you to do those things. But God is presented as someone who wants to be in a relationship. And the important thing of a relationship is that there should be freedom. There should be an option to say no to a relationship. And we call this free will. And on Wednesday I will go deeper into this topic. But just to illustrate a little bit, last month I was celebrating with my wife that we are married for 3 years now. And just assume that 3 years ago when I was asking her to marry me, I would just take her to a forest, put a gun into her face, and say, are you going to marry me? How do you think she would respond? What should she say? And probably she would say yes, because there's a gun into her face. But it will not be out of love. And I think that's an important thing of love. There should be a freedom to say no. There should be freedom to reject. So I think God is offering us freedom to be in a relationship with Him. He's offering Himself. But also with the freedom He gives, He also gives us the option to do good or to do evil. We can decide on what's going on, what we want to do. He gives us also responsibility. And I think if we look to the suffering in the world, the injustice in this world, we can acknowledge that most of the suffering we see is done by human beings. In the Song of Nearly, she's saying children are starving and people are suffering and the world is declining, the world is dying, houses are destroyed. All those things are happening because we as human beings are doing that to each other. We in the West are using a lot of resources, so in a lot of poor countries, they don't have enough resources. We are taking a lot of food and we just have it. We have a good life here, but in a lot of other places they don't have that good life. And maybe look to your own clothing. What kind of clothes are you wearing? Is it fair trade or is it not fair trade? Where is it coming from? Do you know it? At this moment there's more slavery in this world than ever before. But for us it's very easy because we don't see it. It's far away. We just buy clothes in a normal shop where people get paid normally. But a lot of our clothing are coming from poor countries like Bangladesh. And also phones. How many people here are using a fair phone? A phone that is made in a fair way, as fair as possible. I think we are all responsible for things happening in this world. So if we say, okay, if there is a God, He should put away everything what's wrong, all the suffering, all the injustice, He should end it directly. Then I think the big question is, where should He start and where should He end? And of course we're thinking about child abusers and terrorists, and of course we want to end that. But what should God do with our own heart? What should God do with all of us? I'm not always as good as I want to be. I'm not always taking care of everybody in my world. I'm also hurting people. So I think if we say, if there is a God, He should end suffering. I think there are two things we have to think about. What should this God do with us? But also, what's our own responsibility? How can we make this world a better place? What can we do when we see people suffering? And then I want to go with you to my next point. Coldplay is also saying in a song, am I part of the cure or am I part of the disease? I think that's also a nice question to think about when we talk about suffering in the world. But for the third point, I want to take a closer look on the person of Jesus. Because maybe you're thinking, okay, maybe there is a God, what does the God knows about suffering? What can that God do for me when I'm suffering? And I think that's the interesting thing also if you look at the Christian God. In Christianity it's told that Jesus is God and He came to this earth 2,000 years ago. And this Jesus experienced suffering in this world. He was born in an illegitimate relationship. He was a refugee as a child. His family misunderstood him and was ashamed for him. He was betrayed by his friends and even deserted by his friends. He was also growing up in a cruel foreign occupation. He was tortured by an injustice law system. And in the end, he died on a cross. And a cross was made to make you suffer as long as possible. This God knows what suffering is. Jesus experienced this when he was on this earth. And that's also what I have experienced in my life. When I was thinking about suffering in my own life. I experienced suffering, and on those moments I could go to a God who understood me, who understood how it feels to be abandoned by your friends. Friends who were making me suffer. Friends who first were my friends and then suddenly they became the bullies, who gave me a very, very hard time when I was in primary school. That makes it very, very hard. But also in those moments I could go to Jesus. I did know he understood what's going on in my life. He understood the feeling I went through. But sympathy is not the only thing this God I think is offering. Sympathy is nice, but it doesn't help you very much further. So I think another thing he's offering is resurrection. In Christianity it's also told that Jesus not only died on the cross, he was also buried, and in 3 days he rose again. And of this resurrection, there has been some eyewitness accounts you can check out. There are a couple of booklets if you want one. You can fill in the feedback form in the end also. And please order one, so you have a biography of Jesus. But we can see in that story that is not the end. Jesus came to this world to end evil, to end all the bad things what's going on in this world. And he rose again, so it was defeated. And I think that's an interesting thing if we talk about Christianity. Because in a lot of things infused on this world, if you look at the song of Nili, we don't see much hope in the song. Or the Code of Darkness, we don't see much hope in that. It's just, you have to deal with it. And also in the song of Jeremy, you see him struggling with life, but there's no hope, there's no answer, there's no solution for it. And Jeremy is singing one of the last songs in this album. It's about the burial of his mother. You left a hole in this earth, and you paid for it up front. I had to fill it with dirt, while your friends sang the song. May the Lord, mighty God, bless and keep you forever. Grant your peace, perfect peace, courage in every endeavor. And he's singing about the funeral, and he's saying, this mother was a nice example, a great example of love for me. She left a hole in this earth, and the only thing I could do is to fill it with dirt. But her Christian friends, they were singing a song on the funeral. They were singing about hope, about a God who cared, a God who's taking care of her, who is granting her peace and keeps her forever. It's not the end of this life, of our world. No, there's a life after this. And they are singing about this. And Jeremy is struggling with this because he doesn't feel that hope. He cannot grasp that hope. And that's the struggle he's in. And I think that's what's happening in Christianity. We can see a hope. We can grab into a hope. And it's not only a rational answer on the question of why is the suffering in the world, but it can help us to come closer, to connect again with God, with other people. This God came to this earth to end all the problems in this world. And he's asking us also to look around and make this world a better place. And because there's a God, in the end I could also call evil really evil. Because evil exists and good exists, and we have both options. And this God is offering us a relationship. And he came to this earth to give it to us. And he's saying to us, okay, I want to know you. I want to get to know you, and you can get to know me.